without much further ado, what we're going to do is pass on to Alison Bond. Alison, some of you may have met before, works for Rumenco over in Burton is it Burton? Yeah, Burton. Has been there for several years. Out on farm an awful lot, providing nutritional support to farmers and nutritional support to R.M.Jones farms as well. Lots of experience, lots of knowledge, and is going to pass a lot of that on this evening. So without much further ado, I'm going to pass on to Alison, who's going to talk us through how to get the best out of homegrown cereals and the nutrition on farm this coming winter.
Alison. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, John. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Didn't realise it was the first one. Gosh, I'm setting the scene, aren't I, a little bit? Yeah, so as John mentioned, what we're going to talk about this evening is making the most of your homegrown cereal. And I'm not going to keep you very long, but we'll just have a little bit of a discussion. Is it moving on? Yeah. So begin really with setting the scene a little bit. So we'll look at the UK cereal market and this year's harvest in particular. And then we'll look at how we can maybe use that cereal in our cattle diets this year, looking in particular at growing and finishing cattle, looking at some of their animal requirements, and how we could go about looking at some home mixing. I've got a few sort of example diets to put up, some of the benefits for using that home mixing. Like John said, if you've got any questions as we go through, then just stick your hand up, type it in the chat. Or happy to hang around at the end and we can have a bit of a discussion. It's not a massive group of you on here, so maybe once we get to the end, if you want to have a bit of a discussion, we can unmute and do it that way instead. So looking at the UK cereal market, our cool, damp climate of reasonably variable weather, as we're all well aware at the moment, is actually quite well suited for growing cereals. And in particular, in this country, we would be growing mainly wheat, barley, oats, and a little bit of rye. Government figures from the end of last year, they published their figures at the end of the year, showed that last year we grew 24 million tonnes of cereal in the UK, or 24 million tonnes were harvested. As you can see, the majority of this, over 60%, is wheat, followed by barley, and actually I was quite surprised, quite a small amount of oat and oilseed rape is in there as well at just over 1 million tonnes. AHDB estimate that 54% of that total grain demand in the UK is used in animal feed, which again, I was quite surprised by that figure. It was a bit higher than I thought. But what about home consumption? Cereals offer quite a flexible feeding option for home mixing, and utilising them on farm might be a bit more cost effective. It helps to prevent some of that fluctuation that can be an issue in the compound feed market. It gives you that flexibility if you've got different groups of animals about how much you feed them. And this year in particular, I think there's an opportunity to perhaps look at maybe using it on farm rather than selling it. Compound prices remain quite high, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So just moving on to look at these individual cereals that we have in the UK. And again, I may be teaching grandma how to suck eggs a little bit because you guys are out there in the thick of it growing it. So wheat, the primary cereal crop in the UK, high yielding, good levels of starch and energy, and that's what makes it such a good cereal for feeding to our animals and our finishing animals. That good level of energy in there. The issue with wheat is that it is rapidly fermentable in the rumen though, so that can cause quite a lot of digestive upset if we go too heavy on that wheat. It's low in digestible fibre, as are all these cereals, and it has a modest protein. So that protein level is about 12.8%, and it would be a higher protein level than other cereals. In terms of feeding, like I said, can be the cause of digestive upsets, things like acidosis in the rumen due to its rapidly fermentable nature. So tend to recommend no more than 50% on a dry matter basis as a supplementary feed. So if you're feeding it to growing cattle, for example, alongside forage, and if you're feeding it alongside barley, again, no more than 50% of that dry matter intake would be your limit. If we move on to look at barley, slightly lower yielding, and again, very good levels of starch and energy, maybe just slightly lower than the wheat. Again, we've got that low digestible fibre and lower protein as well. But this is a bit more of a it's not quite so doesn't ferment in the rumen quite so quickly, so can be a little bit kinder. We tend to be able to feed a little bit higher level of this. It can be used to supplement forage again in those growing animals, just to top up that energy, or we often see it fed sort of free access ad lib, as long as it's balanced alongside protein and minerals and vitamins, and an ad lib fiber source as well. It can go into sort of barley beef up to an 80% inclusion. So really nice cereal for getting that finish on animals. Our third cereal would be oats, and again they are lower yielding again compared to the wheat and the barley, and actually lower levels of starch energy as well, but do have more fibre. We can see the fibre here as NDF up at 35.6. This is much higher than we see in the wheat and the barley, which makes this a really nice kind for the rumen type cereal, far less likely to cause any digestive upset. And again, we can go with putting quite high levels in, up to 50% dry matter intake. What limits us with the oats is the higher oil level that we find in oats. But it's an excellent feed for young stock and breeding animals. So maybe use on the approach to lambing time, oats into the mix. And again, combined with something like wheat or barley, 10 to 15% in a mix can just help to that rumen health. So worth considering if you've got some oats on the farm to mix them with those higher energy cereals. And then finally, we've got the winter rye, and this isn't a crop that we talk much about, although I think it is getting a little bit more press. It can be taken as grain, or as all these crops can be taken as an early forage crop as well. It has a similar feeding value to barley, so it has good levels of starch and energy, and again, a little bit lower protein in there. But it has higher levels of fibre in it compared to your barleys and your wheats, which makes it quite attractive. But it can be prone to shattering when processed, and we'll talk about processing cereals in a minute and why we might need to do that. And it can also be less palatable than other cereals. So, I mean, we saw right at the beginning, it's way back in terms of the amount we're growing here in the UK, but there has been a little bit of talk about rye in recent times. So moving on to what happened this year, I see that the winter wheat, barley, oats and oilseed rape harvest is now 100% complete. There is a little bit of spring barley still to be taken. I think it was up last week. I was reading Farmers Weekly or The Guardian, and they were saying 99%, or it might have even been the HDB website actually. So I'm assuming with the sort of better weather we're having at the end of this week, then we'll probably find that pretty soon to be complete. I think it'd be fair to say that it's been a challenging season. We had good weather in the late spring, early summer, nice hot, dry conditions, and that really accelerated that growth of that cereal and that development. And then we had a real mixed bag, didn't we? Probably just about the time when the kids broke up for the summer holidays. And that meant that we had to delay the start of our harvest. It was a bit stop-start with a run of a couple of days of good weather and then torrential rain for a few days. And what this meant is that we've actually got quite a mixed bag in terms of quality and quantity for yields and the quality of the crop this year. We know that sort of range for winter wheat has been given between 5 and 13 tonnes per hectare, with an estimated value of finishing up around 7.8 to 8.2, which is quite far back on the book value of 10.4. I think I put up a couple of slides ago. We're also seeing a much lower market price as well compared to where we were last year. So wheat estimated, depending on where you look, around that 180 mark. Last year we were up at 270. Similarly for barley, we're down around 163, but last year we were up well over £200. So this may be the year to consider feeding that cereal rather than selling it and making use of it on farm. Compound prices are not yet dropping. We know that a lot of the mills have bought forward, and they have bought at prices that are over 200. So their compound prices are going to stay that little bit higher as we go into the winter feeding season. So it is perhaps worth having a look at using that cereal on farm if you can. So before we move on to look at how we might include those cereals in the ration, I wanted to talk a little bit about animal requirements. and some of the terms that we use when we're talking about rations. So energy would be the most important nutrient. We talk about it in terms of metabolizable energy, or ME, and this is the proportion of the energy available to the animal, and we measure it in megajoules per day. So it's not really dissimilar from ourselves when we're looking at energy on packets of feed and chocolate bars. All feeds have an ME value, and it's important just to not get confused between the ME and the FME. So FME is your fermentable metabolizable energy, and this is the metabolizable energy that's used by the rumen bugs, and that's linked to the production of microbial protein, and we'll jump on to look at protein in a minute. So that metabolizable energy is provided by sugar, starch and fibre in the diet, and it's quite important to provide a number of different types of energy to animals when we're looking at those diets. We look at things like quickly digested sugars. So you might look at something like a molasses that will give you an instant energy boost. Then you've got your slightly slower digested starch, and they would be coming from things like your cereals, and that helps to maintain energy over a longer period. And then you'd look at your digestible fibres. So you might get that from something like sugar beet pulp, which will give you a much longer lasting energy source, and helps with that sort of digestible fibre to keep the rumen healthy as well. So we talk about energy in terms of the number of megajoules required by an animal per day, and animal requirements will vary quite significantly depending on what we're trying to achieve, between a growing animal or an animal approaching calving or an animal that's in lactation. And there's lots of book values and tables available to help determine an animal's requirements from an energy point of view. Our second important element in the diet is protein. And it can be a little bit of a minefield when we get talking about protein. There's a number of different terms that we kind of band around in the industry. Historically, we would have just talked about crude protein. We would have just said, the diet was X amount of crude protein, but now we're starting to talk a little bit more about MP, metabolizable protein, or microbial protein, or digestible undegradable protein. So if I can put my laser pointer on here, then we should be able to look at this diagram in a bit more detail. So initially we talk about metabolizable protein, and this is the protein that's absorbed by the intestine and available for use by the animal. So that's the protein that would be coming out here after it's been through the rumen, and is available for growth, production, lactation, fertility. But broadly speaking, that metabolizable protein will be coming from two different sources. So our first source is from microbial protein. So this is our sort of mock-up of a rumen here with all our rumen bugs in it. And our rumen bugs will break down non-protein nitrogen and rumen degradable protein. And along with that fermentable energy, that FME that we've just mentioned, they will turn that relatively poor protein and non-protein sources into metabolizable protein, where it can be passed out of the rumen and becomes part of that metabolizable pool. The other part of that metabolizable protein is what we call digestible undegradable protein, or DUP. And this protein is, in essence, it's protected from the rumen bugs. And this will almost pass directly through the rumen without being attacked by those bugs or turned into anything else. And that makes up the other proportion of the digestible undegradable, the metabolizable protein. So about 60 to 75% of the metabolizable protein supply will come from the microbial protein. So this is a really important pathway in providing enough rumen degradable nitrogen or non-protein nitrogen. So enough fuel for those rumen bugs is really, really important. And then our final element, I suppose, that we should mention is our minerals, vitamins and trace elements. And I'm not going to go into any detail tonight on the different minerals, vitamins and trace elements, because we would be here all night. But broadly speaking, we have 100 minerals in life. It's estimated that about 40 have a metabolic role in the body, and some of these are required in such minute amounts that it is extremely rare that will ever be deficient under normal practical conditions. But within this 40, there are 15 elements that we know in particular are required by cattle and sheep for really good health and productivity. And these are what we call our essential mineral elements. So minerals, vitamins and trace elements are required in relatively small amounts if we compare the levels going into a diet compared with protein and energy. So we're talking sort of grams per kilos, milligrams per kilos when we're talking about minerals and vitamins, as opposed, in protein, and we're talking about kilos and percentages. But they have a disproportionate effect on animal performance, which means that they are involved in all aspects of body function, one, if not multiple, minerals, vitamins and trace elements working together in all aspects of body function. So that's why they're deemed to be absolutely essential. So they play as important role as energy and protein within the diet. And we need to consider the overall supply, as they do a lot of interacting as well. And it's important to make sure that rations are balanced, rather than just sort of picking out one or two at a time. So when we talk about essential minerals, we're talking about a mineral that is required to support adequate growth, reproduction and health when all other nutrients are optimal. And it's a mineral element that has been proven to have a metabolic role in the body. And if it's undersupplied, it results in an impairment of one or a multiple of specific functions. Broadly speaking, we divide our minerals and vitamins and trace elements into our major elements. And these we talk about being required in percentages or grams per kilo. So these would be things like calcium, magnesium, phosphorus and sodium. And then we have our micro or our trace elements, which are usually, we talk about them in parts per million or milligrams per kilogram. And they would be things like your zinc, your selenium, your iodine, your cobalt. So just moving on now to look at some different systems and actually feeding these growing and finishing animals. If we start by looking at the growing cattle, what we're trying to achieve here is a steady, continuous frame growth. We're not trying to put fat cover on at this time. We're trying to build the frame. Usually we'd be looking at animals up to around 350, maybe 400 kilos live weight. They have a larger appetite. So we talk about a percentage of the body weight. So dry matter intake would be between 2 to 2.5% of body weight. And they tend to be able to thrive really well on good quality forage, plus a little bit of extra protein, rumen degradable protein, maybe a little bit of extra energy as well. And it's important when you're looking at growing systems and you're basing it on forage to make sure that you understand the forage you've got available. We're not looking for high starch levels. We're not trying to get them fat or put a finish on them. That protein tends to be more important. So we're looking at sort of a protein between 12 to 16%, depending on the breed, depending on the length of time. But we're not looking for that really high energy at this stage. So we're wanting to keep that starch and sugar low. And we're quite happy for that higher fibre diet as well. So like I say, a forage-based diet with maybe a little bit of cereal, and maybe some extra protein as well would be ideal. And just digressing slightly, just to talk about the importance of your forage analysis when you're looking at your diets for these growing animals. We know that no farm has an average silage, so it is worth getting your silage analysed. This year in particular, we've seen some really low sugars, and protein can be a little bit variable as well. So this diagram here, lots of figures on it, but just to demonstrate the importance of having your silage analysed really, and understanding what quality silage you've got when you're looking at growing on animals. So we've got our different qualities along the top here. We've got, a reasonably good energy value down to what would be deemed to perhaps be a slightly poorer energy value. And then what we have down here is the amount of barley that we would be feeding in kilograms per day. And you can see it's quite obvious, really, if you've got a higher quality silage, you don't need to feed quite so much barley to achieve the daily live weight gains that you're looking for. So, an 11 ME, you only need 1 kilo of barley to get 0.8 daily live weight gain. But as you go down, you're going to be needing nearer 5 kilos to get somewhere close to that point, sort of 0.8, 0.94, if you're feeding a poorer quality silage. So actually, that's quite important, and that also can make the difference between how many days finishing it's going to take you as well. So it could be the difference between 144 days to finish and 230 days to finish if you've got these different silages. So again, it's worth just sort of having an understanding of that base diet when you're looking at those growing animals, and then you go from there in terms of how much cereal you need to top up with, and whether you need to put any extra energy in there, any extra protein in there as well. So moving on to look at our finishing systems, a little bit different here. We're trying for a reasonably short period of maximum live weight gain. So these animals tend to be over sort of 350, 400 kilos in weight, and we're looking for target daily live weight gains of over sort of 1.3 kilos per head per day. In terms of the dry matter, they tend to not be able to eat quite so much. We're up at around 2% of their body weight. But we're looking for this fast live weight gain. So protein becomes less important. We hopefully have put all our frame on, and energy becomes more important. So we're looking for a high ME diet, and we're looking for a higher sugar plus starch diet. And this is why the cereal based diets work really well for these finishing systems. We want to keep the oil level low, and we need a little bit of long fiber in there as well. And it's quite important to manage these diets well to avoid any sort of digestive upsets by always offering long fibre. So bedding on straw is probably not enough. These animals need to be taking sort of 1.5, 2 kilos maybe of straw a day just to keep that rumen healthy. So moving on to feeding cereals, and again, some of you might be on here thinking that this year you're going to have a bit of a go at feeding some on farm, whereas maybe you've sold them in the past. Like I said, offering lots of high energy and starch, quite a flexible feeding system, ideal for sort of finishing growing on beef and sheep. They can be used to supplement forages. Like I said, their protein level tends to be a little bit low, tends to be quite variable, and their fibre level will be low as well. So that's why we need to look at balancing the cereals we're feeding. It's not ideal to be feeding them on their own. And again, it's worth topping up with some kind of mineral pack of some description. Cereals can be quite high in phos, which is great because phos is quite an expensive trace element, but they are low in calcium and they are quite low in vitamins as well. So again, we'd be looking to balance these cereals with some kind of protein and then a mineral vitamin pack. Obviously goes without saying, don't feed any mouldy cereals. That's only going to cause you trouble, and be aware of digestive upsets. So I couldn't have a presentation about cereals without perhaps mentioning acidosis, which I will do in a minute. I've got my slides the wrong way around. But just in terms of processing cereals as well, cattle, they can't eat, they don't eat the same way as sheep. Sheep tend to kind of have a grinding motion when they eat, so they can be fed cereals that haven't been processed, and this they have a slower rate of passage as well, which means they can utilize these unprocessed cereals better than cattle. Cattle, we should always be cracking those grains, either rolling them or cracking them. Oats are the exception. They can be fed whole to calves up to 8 months of age, but actually we want to limit that processing, so we need to do it. We need to crack the grain to open it up to make sure the animals can get into it. But actually, if we grind it too much, we can cause a rapid fermentation in the rumen, and with the end result being a digestive upset. So the key message here, I think, is processing for cattle, not so important for sheep. And again, like I say, I don't think we can really have a presentation about feeding cereals without talking about acidosis. So acidosis occurs when we see a high ingestion of high starch diets, and that starch digestion in the rumen can result in an excessive production and accumulation of acid, and this interferes with the rumen pH, drops it down below sort of 5.5, and that's going to interfere with rumen function. It will encourage the wrong type of bacteria and bugs in the rumen. It will kill off all the good guys, and we'll start to see things like fibre digestion decreasing. And signs you've got acidosis would be sort of cud balls maybe in the bedding, loose dung, any kind of like unprocessed or undigested cereal or long fibre in the dung can be a sign that that rumen is just not quite healthy. So in terms of minimising that risk when you're thinking of feeding cereals, as we've just said, don't grind those cereals too fine, just crack them, and look at a gradual inclusion. If you're starting to feed them, increase them to a level that you want them at. Always offer some source of long fibre, for in particular those animals that are perhaps on an ad lib kind of barley beef diet. Never let ad lib feeders empty. So if you're wanting to go down that ad lib system, it's important there's feed in front of those animals all the time. If the bunker gets empty, then what they'll do is they'll gorge themselves when you fill it back up again. If you're looking to just offer a top up, maybe alongside a grazing, grass, forage based diets, then I offer meals little and often through the day, so no more than 2.5 kilos per head per day, per meal, sorry, for cattle over 400, and down for, that should be 2 kilos for cattle over 250, and then just no more than 0.5 kilo per head for sheep. And if you are looking at a sort of a full high barley cereal based diet, then maybe think of adding a neutralising agent in there, which can be added into a mineral pack quite easily. But things like bicarb, good levels of limestone, which will offer your calcium level as well, they can just help to neutralise that acid in the rumen. If we talk about sort of the benefits of home mixing and using, if you're considering feeding cereals this winter, it's important firstly to balance them with a suitable protein source. And like I've already mentioned, a mineral, vitamin and trace element pack. This will just ensure you get efficient animal production, whether you're looking to grow animals or finishes them. But there's lots of good advantages of home mixing. It's a great way of utilising your homegrown feeds. As I mentioned right at the beginning, it's a really nice way of preventing that sort of fluctuations that you can be at the peril of, I suppose, from buying in compound feed. Gives you complete control over the ingredients of what you're going in. There's no least cost rationing. You've got that quality and freshness. You can mix as much or as little as you need. There's a flexibility option there as well. So if you've got growing and finishing animals on the farm, you can make 2 different diets and alter that energy and that protein levels in those diets to suit what you're trying to achieve. And it's often lower cost than bought in as well. So obviously a little bit of work from you, but it can save you quite a lot of money. So just wanting, before I look at some of these diets, to look at some of the protein options available and give you a little bit more information on some of those that you might be looking at to put alongside your cereal. So the first protein we want to talk about is soybean meal. And soybean gets sort of a bit of bad press really at the moment, and I think over the next few years we'll probably see the amount we use, we will see the amount we use decrease, but there's no getting away from the fact that it is an excellent protein in terms of its crude protein value, but also it's a really good quality protein. 37% of the crude protein is digestible undegradable protein, so it's that proportion of the protein in the diet that escapes that rumen fermentation and passes directly into the metabolizable protein pool. So it also has quite a nice amino acid profile, and it's really good for younger animals that are growing and they need that good quality protein. It's really good for lactating animals as well, helps to drive that milk production. And it also has quite a nice energy value as well. So it is quite a nice all-round protein. And we talk a little bit about soy pass. So that's a treated soya. It's heat treated, so it just has an even higher DUP value. So again, it's probably not the type of protein that we would be looking at in great levels for our finishing and our growing animals, but maybe more of our younger or lactating animals. Like soybean meal, rapeseed meal provides a good source of rumen degradable protein as well as digestible undegradable protein. It's not quite as good in DUP value as soya, but total crude protein is slightly lower in rape, around 37% on a dry matter basis. But it does again have good energy, not quite again as good as the soya, but around 11.8. And again, the amino acid profile is quite good on it as well, so really good for sort of driving perhaps milk production. And so rape does offer quite a good alternative to soybean meal. It's not quite up there, but it does offer a reasonably good alternative. And again, there's quite a popular protected rape in the market, the Nova Pro, and this is a hot pressed rape, which is the process that they use to protect, or not to protect it, but the process they use to drive the increase in the digestible undegradable protein takes advantage of the naturally occurring wood sugars, and so it what it does, it increases the level of digestible undegradable protein in rape up to a similar level that we would see in soya. So again, quite a nice protein, but again, probably not necessary to be looking at diets entirely containing rape for our growing and our finishing animals that can make use perhaps of some of the poorer quality proteins, but ideal for those that are perhaps growing or lactating. Peas and beans, again, it's widely grown throughout the UK and utilised. They're high in protein, and they have a good sort of moderate starch level, and they tend to be low in fibre. Beans will have a slightly higher energy than peas, but they can have that variable palatability. So we do limit the amount that goes into the diets. Beans would be around 30%, peas around 50% of the dry matter intake. So limiting sort of that risk of palatability issues. And then finally, we talk about sort of urea protein. So urea is a rumen degradable protein source, or a non-protein nitrogen, in that it isn't technically a protein, but our rumen bugs, because they're really, really clever at what they do, they can take this poor quality feed ingredient and they can turn it into good quality protein. And they do that by breaking down that urea in the rumen to release ammonia. And then in the presence of the energy, so that fermentable metabolizable energy that we talked about, that ammonia is utilized to produce microbial protein. And microbial protein is the best protein that we can offer an animal. It has an ideal amino acid for milk production and growth. And so urea offers a really nice protein source and cost-effective protein for our animals that have a fully functioning rumen. So anything over 3 months of age can make good use of small amounts of urea in the diet. So every 1% of urea in a ration is worth about 2.87% crude protein, because literally all that urea is providing, it has no energy in it, it has no minerals, no vitamins, nothing else other than that rumen degradable protein source. So it's just that nitrogen source for those rumen bugs. So as long as our rumen is functioning well and we've got good levels of fermentable energy in the diet, so whether that be from your cereal, from starch or something like that, it's a really safe product to be feeding, and as long as it's mixed well. Urea should be fed in conjunction with sulfur minerals, because the process by which those rumen bugs create the microbial protein uses sulfur. But as long as you've got a mineral pack in there that's got sulfates in it, so zinc sulfate, copper sulfate, things like that, then that should provide enough sulfur in the diet to help those animals use those rumen bugs use the urea. And then finally, it's perhaps worth thinking about protein meals, because these offer quite a simple system alongside your homegrown cereals. So R.M.Jones have a range of super stock protein meals. They're in 25 kilo bags, and they contain a mix of urea protein and natural protein, and so it makes it really easy for home mixing, because you can add 1 or 2 or 3 bags to your mix, and you know whether you're going to get a 14 or a 16% final meal. They have a full inclusion of all your minerals, vitamins and trace elements as well, so there's no extra bags of minerals that you need to put in, and again, they offer that flexibility if you've got groups of animals on farm with different requirements. So 2 of the products in the range that are ideal for feeding to your growing and finishing cattle would be the high pro beef and the high pro cattle and sheep. So both have 50% protein, both have that blend of urea and natural protein, and it's not about the energy at all, because we've got that energy coming in from the cereals. The super stock high pro cattle and sheep has a slightly higher spec min and vitamin pack in there. It has protected zinc in there, so that one's ideal for any animals, maybe sort of younger animals or animals that are perhaps going on to lactation or anything like that. But apart from that, both of these are ideal for feeding in that growing and intensive system, and we'll look in a minute at how a diet might look with them contained. So just jumping back really to our proteins, when you're thinking about buying in protein, it's always worth doing a bit of a comparison in terms of unit cost, and this table just demonstrates some current pricing for different protein sources, along with the percent of protein in them. I've just put the energy in there out of curiosity as well, and then just broken it down into what that cost is per 100 grams of protein. So for example, you might look at beans and peas because they look quite cheap in your pound per ton. But again, that protein percent level is a little bit lower. So you need to take that into consideration. So it's going to cost you, well, in the case of peas, it's going to cost you more to feed peas to get the protein level you need than for example, rape. So again, it's always worth kind of just breaking that down. And I'm not going to get too hung up on it today, but just a quick exercise. And you can do exactly the same when you're looking at energy as well, taking the energy into consideration, how much energy you're going to be getting, breaking it down into that unit cost rather than looking at the ton price. So outlined on this slide here is a typical growing ration. I have used AHDB's feeding beef and growing animals for a little bit of help here from what they would recommend. So again, as we mentioned at the beginning, we would be looking perhaps at a typical growing ration would be largely forage based. So we've got quite a lot of grass silage in here. We're looking at 12% crude protein and a 10.6 ME, so reasonably average grass silage. And then we would perhaps look to top up with a little bit of a barley rape mix and a bit of a GP mineral, so that we got that final crude protein of around 14 to 15 I would be looking for in these growing animals, but I wouldn't be getting too worried about the ME value because we're just looking to put that frame on at the moment. So a diet like this, based on some of the figures I've been putting up this evening, would be looking at around £1.29 per head per day. And we're looking at animals growing between a kilo to a kilo and a quarter. If we look at a finishing ration, we've got it split here according to your steers and your bulls. Again, we're looking for that higher daily live weight gain. Your steers, we may even still get away with a grass silage based diet, but certainly we'd be wanting to put that little bit extra barley in there to try and push them on, but not too concerned about the protein at this stage. So we can see that our crude protein at 12, we're getting that without actually supplementing with any extra protein at this point. Our bulls, maybe we'd put them on a barley beef type system where we would, quite a high level of barley in there and that rape. And again, we're looking at a crude protein, again, taken from AHDB. They've put it in at about 13.5. But I would say we could probably go a bit lower and push that energy. But we're looking at over 12 ME for these animals to try and push that cover on them in terms of getting them finished. And then just one final diet, looking at sort of how a diet might look using the Superstock High Pro beef. So we might look at a mix of perhaps wheat and barley, 95%, and just a 5% inclusion of the high pro beef. So the high pro beef is a 50% protein, so that 5% inclusion would just be 2 bags for the mix, 5%, 50 kilos per ton, and our finished mix would be 14.4% dry matter. So we could go up to a 10% inclusion, so that would be 4 bags per ton, adjusting obviously the wheat and barley accordingly, and that would give us a 16% if we were really wanting to go up to that higher level. And again, if we're right at the finishing stage, we could even drop that protein, high pro beef down a little bit to drop that protein. But even at that level, we've got a 13 ME end product there, and it's fully mineralized, and cost at the moment on farm to produce that would be just over £200. So that's not bad for a mix on farm to get those animals growing and finishing this year. So it's probably worth thinking about, and I'm sure you can have conversations with your R.M.Jones guys about how these kind of things could work on your farm. So really, just to sum up, as we mentioned right at the beginning, it's been a challenging harvest, I think, and that's offered us kind of a lower quantity and quality of cereals this year. price is quite low. So the question is it worth looking to feed it this year on farm and make use of it on farm, rather than having to sell it and then buy in higher priced compound feed. Cereals offer quite a lot of flexible feeding options, and hopefully I've demonstrated that they've got good levels of energy and starch in there, and if balanced well with proteins and minerals, they can make a very nice complete feed or a nice supplement for going alongside forages. Home mixing itself is quite cost effective, and again offers that flexibility at home for just depending on the systems that you've got and what you're trying to achieve. So thank you ever so much for joining us this evening. I don't know, John, whether there's been any questions while I've been nattering away, or if anybody's got any questions now.
Yeah, I have. I've had a few come over on text messages and WhatsApp messages.
Okay.
Some revolving around beet. So asking the same questions, instead of feeding cereals, does feeding protein into the ration with soya or with our proteins or beans work with beet in the ration? I think they're around about 40% inclusion of beet, so quite high levels of beet in there.
Yeah, and beet would be it's got quite high levels of moisture, so the animals will eat quite a lot. But yes, they will need a protein source, and depending on how the beet's being fed, sometimes a bucket works quite well as in terms of a way of getting a bit of extra protein into these animals. It kind of depends on the system you've got. But yeah,
So beet works in that then, but you have to be careful about overall dry matter in the ration.
Yes, yeah,
making
and just making sure they're eating what they need to eat, and depending on the system, depending on how you're feeding them, are you feeding them on the ground? Have they got the tops on them? The tops have got a bit of protein in them, but yeah, so different systems, but certainly, yeah, there's opportunity there as well.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's good. I'll pass that one back in a second because the guys had to go on that one. So I had one from a guy named James. I didn't give him a surname. I can only see first names rather than surnames on some of the chats. It says, James asked, how do you know if you're feeding the right level of minerals in the diet or in the ration?
Oh, well, that's where you need to use your friendly R.M.Jones representative and ask them to have a look. But actually what you can do is, and it's not difficult, and I've been teaching John all about this, but you can get hold of requirement tables easily enough, and you can work out what, using book values, you can work out if you know that they're feeding X amount of barley and barley contains X amount, you can work it out. Or you can just, I run a rationing program and I can just tap it all in and I can easily tell you whether you're going to be short. But broadly speaking, if you're feeding a cereals and you're looking at sort of growing animals, at the very least, you're going to need some kind of calcium and some kind of vitamins in there just to keep them ticking along.
Right. Okay. So the key macros in there are things like cobalt, selenium, iodine. Obviously, we can do those both as boluses and as nutrition and in buckets. But then all the trace element, all the minor minerals.
It's all it's the majors. It's the calcium that we know cereals are short in calcium. They're good in phos, which is great. So, make sure, and if you do feed a high cereal diet, that you're not feeding over the amount of phos, because that phos is still very expensive. And actually, if you're not needing it, then those animals are just processing it and excreting it. So I wouldn't be looking at a high phos mineral, but I would be looking at, large, high calcium. So I'd be looking at sort of 20% calcium type diets. Probably if you're feeding bulls, I'd be looking at mag levels, keeping them quite sensible. You don't really need the mag a lot unless they're out grazing. You're not going to be short of mag. So I'd be looking at maybe 3% mag in your mineral, probably maybe 6 to 8% salt in there, and then a good sort of trace element pack.
So yeah, we need to get a good nutritional silage analysis and work out where we go from there. So almost a complete ration that's going in front of them, or work out what they're taking and then trying to put it together so we know what those animals are eating in a day, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. It's reasonably easy to do, and just look at how that compares to their requirement, what they're needing, and then we can look at those shortfalls. And in terms of minerals, the easiest thing you can do is put to something that's farm specific. So if you know your farm, especially if you are feeding growing animals and you know what your forage is doing this year, then we can put something together that's going to suit you and adjust that every time you need to.
Yeah, I was, from my perspective, I noticed you commenting on cereal prices earlier on. I had to put an unhappy face up there, because they've all gone a bit west. So it's they're making them quite competitive in the ration at the moment compared to compound feeds, that's for sure, adding in a form of protein of whichever type you're looking at. Dave has asked, he came to me on a WhatsApp message, said, I'm feeding rapeseed, molasses and straw. Not sure what the analysis of this, but my stores do well over winter. Can you analyze it and see what else I need? Well, I think I can answer that. Yes, we can, can't we? We could do that.
Yeah, I mean, what I'd probably suggest is that we just ran it through. It's a little bit difficult to run complete mixes through an NIR machine, because the NIR machine is relying on sort of values. So we can run a silage through, but when we start running TMRs through, it gets a bit inaccurate. But certainly we could look at it separate. I would be, did you say straw, rape and molasses?
Yeah.
I would be a bit concerned that there perhaps wasn't enough energy in there, but then depending on what you're trying to achieve, the molasses might be offering enough to just keep them ticking over. But we can, certainly, I mean, by all means, ping the details to John in terms of what's going in, and we can just have a look at what that looks like in terms of energy and protein as a starting point. That's not an issue.
Okay, yeah, well, I'll have a chat with Dave and find out what it's going in to see if we can get a sample off him. Not a problem at all. I've got one I'm just going to put in the chat, which is from Rob. I'm not sure if I think that's Rob Bevan. I know he's on there, but I don't think that's Rob Bevan. I think it's someone else. I'm feeding beet and I've been cutting peas and barley as a whole crop. Are they providing much energy? Well, I'm sure the beet is. The peas and barley.
The beet will be. The peas and barley. Peas and beans, was it, or peas and barley?
Peas and barley, it says. Yeah.
Peas and barley as a whole crop would be quite.
So I assume they're cutting them as well, they either cut them as a whole crop or they're cutting them as like a dredge corn almost.
Yeah.
Doesn't say.
Again, they would be reasonably good. I would have thought whole crop beans and barley would offer quite a nice balance. It would be quite rumen kind, wouldn't it? And depends what you're feeding it to, I suppose, in terms of what you're trying to achieve. But alongside that beet will be giving that sugar energy. You might still need a little bit extra protein based on, I mean, if you were trying to grow animals on it, you might need a bit of extra protein, but if you were finishing animals, it'd probably be not too bad.
It says at the bottom, I didn't read the last bit, the analysis of my whole crop, so I assume that's a whole crop mix, always comes back with low proteins. So peas and barley, I've noticed that on analysis, that whole crop analysis, they never seem to translate what you think is going to be a higher protein.
No, and it depends if you've treated it. Like if you've urea treated it, an NIR machine will struggle to pick that up. So then you need to look at having a wet chem done on it, which costs more but will give you a better indication of what's going on. But sometimes it's also worth. It's that whole nutritionist thing, isn't it? It's the book value. It's then what the animals tell you they're eating. And if your animals are doing well on it, then maybe the analysis isn't quite picking up. Sometimes whole crops are difficult. Depends if there's grain in there that's not being picked up for analysis, and how dry it is.
Yeah, that's what I've seen you sometimes pick a sample out with peas and barley or a whole crop mix, and it all falls on the floor underneath the strawy fraction.
Yeah, you end up with just a load of straw.
Way of sampling it and taking that out. With that in there, that would probably help out no end. Just a quick thought: when they do an analysis in the mill, because I know people have asked me before, or when you do an analysis, is that product that we send in fully milled up and then homogenized and sampled, or is it?
No. So, well, forages will be going through an NIR machine, near infrared machine, and they will go in as they are. So they will go in. It's almost like a brick. And they will just fill the brick, and then it sends light waves through and measures the kind of the reading through these kind of measures. And I'm not explaining this very well, I know that, but you have a database, a big database in the back of this machine, and it will sort of compare. You'll tell it that it's a grass silage, and it will compare your sort of light waves according to other grass silages within the machine. I mean, there's thousands and thousands in there, and that's how it comes up with your results. So historically, we would have done wet chem, and in that case, we would have dried the sample, we would have ground it down, and then we would have done a protein, we would have done all the different analysis one by one, and that takes ages, and it's quite expensive. But now NIR machines they're obviously not quite as accurate, but they're much quicker, and they are well recognised. They are recognised as being accurate. But if you've got a sample that is a bit variable, or a TMR or something like that, then the wet chem is the better option. But that can end up escalating into quite a large cost. So sometimes when you're looking at a TMR, it's worth just analysing all your ingredients. So if you've got maize silage going in, or cereal, or you've got grass silage, analysing them all separately and then collating it that way, because it's a better way.
Okay. Bledian Pugh has come on with a question. Very rare people type in the chat box, which is great. Well done, Bledian. I'm impressed with that. He says, how does crimped grain compare to feeding fully ripe grain? We're feeding store cattle and are looking at reducing our bought-in protein. Would crimped barley and high clover silage be enough? Obviously, you need R.M.Jones mineral in there, of course, Bledian.
Yes,
that would be the right thing to do every day of the week.
The nice thing about crimped grain is it's kinder on the rumen, so you can get away with feeding higher levels. And yeah, depending on the treatment, yes, it will increase your protein. It can increase your protein as well, can't it? But yeah, again, so yeah, I'd have to have a look. But for stores, it would probably be enough. You might, yeah, it would probably be enough, I think.
So the clover silage is going to be sort of 16 to potentially 16%, 17%.
It's going to be quite high protein, and then your crimped grain.
It's going to be sort of 13 and a half ME.
Yeah, and then your protein will probably be up around 12, 13, won't it? So, and then you can get that. It works in the rumen better as well. So,
the beauty of crimped grain, I think, is you can cut it sort of 3 weeks before everyone's sweating with their combines out in the middle of summer, and it stacks up a bit in the back of the combine tank, but just crimp it, put it into a shed, roll it down, put a sheet over it. That's with an inoculant, and it's good quality feed then.
It absolutely, exactly, and it takes away that risk. We had this real challenge this year, didn't we? And it's the same really for sort of whole crops and stuff, because you can go in and take it. It doesn't matter if you miss that little window you've got. And all sorts of treatments, urea treatment for grain, that kind of stuff as well.
Does anyone else have any other questions? You can type if you click on the chat box at the top, that should then open a screen up on your right hand side where you can type in any messages or questions. Any questions, obviously non-marital ones would be good, because I'm not sure we can answer those too well. But fire away if you've got any questions. We're going to be here for a bit. Come on, at least one.
Oh, we've had quite a few.
Yeah, we have had a few, yeah. I want to see one more question before we go. Or am I going to start picking on people? I think that's a bit mean, isn't it?
I think it is.
Yeah. So just other one. If people are growing peas and barley, putting into the ration, obviously the protein quality is very different to soya, I guess, is it?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's better for growing cattle, or is it better for finishing cattle?
More so you're finishing, because they don't need as much protein. So if you're looking at sort of beans and peas, where that protein is sort of in the mid to late 20s, then certainly. But actually anything over 3 months of age can make use of that sort of urea protein, those poorer quality proteins, because the bugs will just do their work on it. So I wouldn't be buying soya for older growing or finishing animals. I don't think they get the best out of it, if that makes sense. And when it's up as high as it is in terms of price, over £400 a tonne, then save it for the lactating animals or the ewes on the approach to lambing, or your babies.
The obviously with soya, there's going to be a drive over time to reduce the amount of soya we're importing, whether that's around GM or whether the environmental profile of it, which is pretty shocking if it's Brazilian soya or from parts of the world where rainforests are a threat. Where do our proteins contain much soya that we supply? So the 40 and 50% proteins?
No, the natural protein is coming from rape in those. There's been a reasonably active drive from Rumenco to cut the amount of soya. We're doing a lot of work with rape and Nova Pro. So yeah, your proteins are urea plus rape. The natural proteins coming from rape.
So far more sustainable in a lot of ways, And I guess a lot of that rapeseed is going to be UK sourced, would it be?
Yeah.
So all this, we're ticking all those boxes in that respect.
Yeah.
So we have a couple of farms where we supply all their protein needs through our bag proteins, 25 kilo, 20 kilo bags. They find them quite useful you can just measure out a ration with bags rather than having to buy bulk volume. Pretty cost effective as well, because I did some costings and we're within sort of £5 of an out and out soya ration, and obviously with a lot better profile on it.
And ease for just like you say, that 20 kilo or 25 kilo bag, and just knowing that if you put 4 bags into the mix, you're going to get X amount of protein without that sort of variation. And that, proteins will vary. Protein levels of cereals will vary, protein levels of stuff you're buying in will vary, whereas this, because it's a manufactured product, it will always have that protein value that it says it's got on the bag.
Well, I haven't seen any more questions come on the chat. I was hoping we'd see at least one more. I'm not going to pick on anyone, because I noticed when I said that last, 3 people left the chat, so I think I was just out of panic. So we are going to have a few more talks, several more talks, hopefully one a month. They will move across all the areas of nutrition. So hopefully Alison will be back to talk about some sheep nutrition later on, both mid-season, pregnancy, more specific rations for different types of livestock. And we'll also cover some animal health topics, possibly around lameness in ewes and in cattle, and even sometimes how to set out systems to work more efficiently for yourself. I'd like to say thank you very much to Alison for providing all the information for us today.